Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to June's interval training. I'm Rebecca Magstead, Senior Director at Peloton, and thank you for joining today's training, which is all around managing user security. The format for today is roughly 20 minutes of a demonstration by my colleague, Erin Porras, followed by a few minutes of question and answer. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone will be muted during the training and chat will be disabled. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that thread and we'll get to your questions after the demo. If you have additional questions or we aren't able to get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to us. Also, if you have ideas for future trainings you'd like to see, let us know. So without further ado, let's get into managing user security. Over to you, Erin.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rebecca. Let me share my screen. All right, so I have a brief agenda to walk through just to show what we're going to present here today. I know we have a short session, so want to cover some important topics here, but it'll be somewhat high level. So if folks do have additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We can try to cover them, and we can always reach out following the session as well here. So the topics we have on the agenda, a little bit of a soup to nuts approach. Going to go through some basics here on what is role-based security and how does Oracle use it. A couple of tutorials here on how to create users and assign roles. Talk a little bit about data access. And the last two topics are a little bit more advisory, but just some best practices on customizing or modifying roles. It's becoming more of a hot topic in the Oracle Cloud space. And then lastly, we'll end and talk about some reporting capabilities around security roles and users and auditing specifically, and how we can take a look at some of that data. All right, so I have this slide here on role-based security. I know there's kind of a lot of information on here, so bear with me as I kind of try to talk through this. But when we think about role-based security and what actually is it, I like this statement here on who can do what on which data. I think is a good sort of short summary of what role-based security is and what it does. So I'm actually going to look over here up to the right and give talk through a couple examples here. So when we think about the types of users that are accessing Oracle and using it in the system, a few examples here. So we'll start with the who. So a couple examples, we've got employees, line managers, HR specialists. A few good examples as who's the subject of those particular users. The what defines what can they do in the system, what sort of transactions are they doing, what pages can they access, what are they performing to do their job, etc. So for example, an employee, basic function here, they can view their pay slip. For line managers, maybe they're creating performance documents, and then for HR specialists, maybe they need to transfer or promote workers within their organization. Now, the other important part here is, which data set can they transact on? So for example, for employees, maybe they can view their pay slips, but again, it's only for themselves. We obviously don't want them to view pay slips for other folks there. For line managers, this create performance documents, again, only folks within their reporting hierarchy that they would have access to. And then maybe for HR, the which data set, maybe that's locked down to specific departments there. So kind of summary there of sort of what role-based security is. Can it be based on the person, based on the job, what are they doing, and then which data set are they able to transact on. Now the other takeaway on this slide that I want to talk through is the overall security definition is really cumulative, right? It works in union. Some people call this sort of a stacking concept, or sort of the summation of all the access assigned to a user. So that's important when we're looking at users that may have performed multiple functions within the organization. And from a system standpoint, we do assign them multiple roles. We just want to be cautious that when we look at their access as a whole, it's really a summation of all of those different accesses combined there. Okay, so I know it's a quick intro, so hopefully I think most folks probably have some foundation already. Hopefully you're already live within your system. Now we're going to go through just a couple of tutorials here on the user part. So again, largely most folks already have their own user accounts created in Oracle. this few steps here are some options actually for creating users. So, when we as consultants kind of move around to different clients, there's actually, somewhat of a variance on, how are different organizations creating users. So this is something that, maybe could be used for your organization if you have different requirements for different types of users. But wanted to kind of cover those three options here. And if you're, obviously if you're new to this, it's a good intro as well. So first option, if we wanted to create a new user, again, I think the scenario is, we have someone that needs access to Oracle. But how do we do that? So one is adding a new person through some of the HCM functions. So if you are implementing or using, HCM, core HR, these would look familiar to you. If you're using Oracle as your HR system of record, the way that we get people in there is we hire them essentially, right? So there's transactions for hiring an employee, and we may be adding, contractors or contingent workers. So there's this transaction as well. And then, this process has, we'll walk you through, forms basically to add all of the attributes in for those particular employees. And now, again, this is primarily used if Oracle is your HR system of record. You will be using, one or multiple of these types of functions here. Now, the other option, if maybe you're not using Oracle as your HR system of record, there is a way to add, in a more simplified view, add a new person through this manage users function. So if you're using ERP or supply chain, this may look more familiar to you if you're adding, users or new records into the system manually. Has some similar attributes, right? So we're still going to define, names for folks, email. Later on this form, there's, legal entity, business unit. So, and it's somewhat similar to here. You still get a person record created and attached to this, but it does kind of trim down some of the HCM specific stuff that you probably don't need for ERP or supply chain. And then lastly, so this third one is, what I would call for implementation users. So really the key difference here is if we do add a user through the security console, which, I'll talk through in a minute, they won't actually get a person record created. And more we're starting to see some functions within Oracle where you do need to have a person record to be able to do those specific things within the system. But for, maybe you have some other consultants, or maybe you're doing some other, project, or have some very specific user requirements where maybe they don't need this person record, then perhaps creating this implementation user through Security Console is a good option for you. So they're still able to assign roles and control the security there, but no person records created, no person numbers created, and don't have to worry about any sort of headcount reporting, et cetera there. For the most part, I think for folks that are live, I would say we try to sort of steer away from these local implementation users, and try to leverage some of these, first two options, either employees or contingent workers, a little bit easier to manage, a little bit easier to audit as well, I think, for those two. So a little advisory piece there as well. Okay, so moving on to some of the tools within Oracle around security. So the main page and the main tool that you're going to use is this Security Console. And there's a couple kind of prerequisites here. The one main role that does drive this is IT Security Manager. And then to get there, there's this, you go through Navigator, and then if you go to Tools and then Security Console, once you click that, you'll land on this page here. You can also get it to your home page. Navigation may be slightly different depending on if you're on sort of the newsfeed UI or other classic UI there. But regardless, the Security Console still looks the same. We're not going to go into too many of these functions here for today's session, but wanted to kind of list some of these out in case folks did have questions. But again, majority, 99% of the security configuration will actually be done through the Security Console. So it would be very good to get familiar with this here. All right, so, assuming we have those users kind of created in the system here, again, from one of those first three options, how do we assign the roles to the users? So a couple of screenshots here. Again, I know this may be trivial for some folks, but, quick refresher. And maybe there's one or two tidbits in here you may learn for yourself too. So as I mentioned, this is kind of the newsfeed UI here. You can also get, access this through the navigator on this little hamburger menu here. But the zoom shots on us to go through this tools security console. We'll land here, and then to assign roles to the users, we'll click this users button here. We can search for that particular user from this search bar here. You do have some various options on how to search, right? So you can search by username here in this particular environment. The username happens to be first name dot last name, but I know not every organization has username that matches the name, right? So username could be a number, it could be alphanumeric, something else, but you do have options here to search by first name, last name, and I believe email as well. So some good search options there. Now to actually open the user account and make edits, you just click on this display name. So that link will take you into the particular user account. And then to add roles here, so you'll be able to view some information here. If we did want to add roles, you click this edit button, and that'll allow you to add roles here. So there'll be another button that'll become made available for adding roles here. You just click that, and then a new search window will open. And then from here, you have the option to search for, basically all of the roles here. So that is one thing I didn't mention. So if you do have, access to Security Console, you will have access to, all users and all role sort of configuration there. Now in this example, maybe we wanted to add this accounts receivable manager. So, I can search there. Oracle does have a pretty good smart search. So you can start typing in and it'll pull up the list of those roles. Another neat feature here, if you weren't aware, you can actually search for another user and then, add the roles from that user that you searched for into the, user in question that you're transacting on. So, that's a good way to sort of mirror access from one user to another without having, to pull up two different screens or, take a screenshot. Or maybe they have a lot of roles here and there's, 20 roles you want to add. And this is a very quick and easy way to mirror access from one user to another. All right, so I know we're moving quick here, but after we assign roles, the next thing that I want to think about is data access here. So this is sort of the which data part of sort of the summary statement. Now data access and data security is slightly different across the pillars here. So HCM in particular has a different model for data security, which leverages security profiles. Now the security profiles in HCM, basically within all these objects here, we're able to sort of specify, what people can I see, and maybe it's, hey, these people in a specific department, or which payrolls data can I see. So maybe it's, only the US, biweekly payroll that I should be able to have access to. So there's a number of different options here, and depending on which part of HCM you're working in, we have some flexibility there. Definitely the most, at least in my experience, most used ones are going to be these person security profiles, right? So most folks are concerned about who you can see. So that person one is a big one. And then on the ERP and the supply chain side, there are different security contexts. Obviously, it's different functions that they're doing in the system. But for example, for financials, there may be specific ledgers that folks in one country have access to and folks in another should not, right? So that's a pretty common one. Same thing across business unit and legal entity we see often as well. So within every particular user and each particular role, we can set these security contexts. So we have the flexibility there to control that for financials, and then same thing for supply chain. You can see the contexts are slightly different here even for supply chain, right? So there is some business unit context. Inventory orgs is a big one for supply chain as well. And then business unit is a common one here across some of the other objects. So the concept of data access and data security is in my mind, it's the same, right? Just on which data are we accessing, but the actual configurations in the system just may vary slightly here. Now this slide I've got here has just some kind of high level steps on how we might go about assigning this data access. One thing to note on the HCM side, and even for some of the like employee and contingent worker abstract roles, we actually create and assign the security profiles to the role, and then we assign the roles to the users. On the flip side, on the ERP and supply chain side, we assign the roles separately, and then we assign the data access separately as well. So again, a little bit different there, but concept is the same. I know folks aren't really too familiar with the HCM security profiles. Again, we are very experienced in that, so I'm happy to help answer any questions or provide some guidance if folks are interested in implementing HCM security, or we have other specific HCM security requirements here. All right, so we will keep it moving just for the sake of time here. The next section we're going to get into is just some advice and guidance on some best practices for customizing and modifying roles. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a topic we're starting to hear more from our customers and becoming a bigger part of our project as well on the consulting side, and even for some of our managed services clients as well. So wanted to talk through some of the reasons here for using custom roles. So we hear the term quite often working in Oracle and working on these projects here. There's sort of kind of two camps, at least in the project world and implementation world, on hey, do we use custom roles, or do we try to use and leverage the predefined roles that Oracle offers? And I think there actually has been somewhat of a pivot recently in the last few years into going more towards the custom role approach. And I want to talk through a few of those reasons outlined here. So I'll start with the first one that's I think is pretty obvious, is really just if there are gaps in the predefined roles. And this was the case even 5, 8, 10 years ago as well. If there was if we didn't have a predefined role that met a requirement, then oftentimes we would create a custom role here. A good example of this is read-only roles or inquiry roles where that particular role would have access to a particular page or a particular data set, but we don't want the users to be able to transact on it. Like they only need to be able to view it. So that's a pretty common requirement, but there aren't too many Oracle predefined roles that meet that. So that's one that comes up quite a bit. The second one here that is starting to come up more is sort of this subscription impact. So this is more of an issue for roles that are sort of common across Oracle. So the big ones here are going to be like an employee role, right? So everyone in the organization has should have an employee role. Actually gives basic access to not only HCM data, but even in finance and supply chain, there are some specific accesses in there that it's part of this employee role that are needed to make some of the other modules work. But the problem is that, hey, maybe I've licensed supply chain and procurement, but I'm not doing HCM. And there's, all this HCM function built into that role. You may start getting a report from Oracle that says, hey, you're using 100 licenses of HCM that you haven't purchased. And the way that Oracle determines that is by like these specific privileges within your security roles and within your active users. So again, this is something that we're starting to take more consideration of for new projects, and we started to hear feedback that Oracle is passing off those reports to our existing customers and managed services customers. So again, I think the takeaway here is we want to be using roles with the privileges that we're licensed for, and if we're not, the guidance even from Oracle is, hey, we should be removing those roles or privileges from the predefined roles and using custom roles going forward. So third one here, segregation of duties and risk mitigation. So I actually think that for the most part, Oracle does a pretty good job in the predefined roles at implementing segregation of duties. And there are some areas where maybe it gives like a little bit too much access here or there that we have to trim down. And those are the cases where, again, if we have the custom roles, we have the flexibility to do that. Broadly, as from a security approach perspective, this is something that we want to keep near the top of the list on mitigating risk, building out our roles to mitigate the chance of risk or opportunity for folks to potentially, commit some fraud or other nefarious activities. Next one here, so more for more granular access control. So, a common phrase in sort of the security world is this least privilege principle, where we're giving folks the minimum amount of access and permissions in order to perform their job functions. And this kind of ties back to the previous point on we're trying to mitigate risk where we can, and not give folks more access than they need to. And a lot of folks may not be trying to do anything nefarious, but if something's there, folks are going to inherently click on it. So with the custom roles, we can get very, very granular and sort of follow that least privilege principle if required for a particular client. And then the last one here is really user experience and operational efficiency. So custom roles and the privileges, as mentioned before, they do translate into what folks can see and do in the system. So if we can remove any sort of these unnecessary buttons or pages or options there in a secure manner, I think it actually provides a better user experience for everyone, right? So if I'm an HR person and maybe there's 3 or 4 functions that I need to do in the system, I don't need to be presented with 40 or 50 functions that are in some of the predefined roles, right? It just makes my job a little bit harder. Can be overwhelming for the end user. So I think having that user experience lens on sort of the security design is important going forward. And again, we can help improve that experience by customizing the roles and trimming stuff down that's needed. All right, so those are all the reasons we kind of have we've kind of come up with here for using custom roles here. Now some sort of guidance and some, I'll say these are very high level steps on how do we go about sort of building custom roles if you're looking to do this for your own organization. Again, these are very, very high level here. I would say majority of the time we actually want to identify one of the predefined roles to copy to use as a starting point. Again, and some of the roles are quite large, and there's a lot of intricacies and nuances within the predefined roles. And maybe we're only trying to pull back, a little bit, a few functions here or add a function here or there. So if we can have that predefined role as a starting point, it becomes a lot easier to, either add or remove from that copied role to meet the business requirement. So, roles can be built from scratch, but it does require a little bit more advanced knowledge and experience. Like I said, there are some very small nuances that if you haven't really, gone through that trial by fire, you may miss something here or there. And that's always kind of a scavenger hunt to try to figure out. So a takeaway there, again, I try to recommend to start with one of the predefined roles as a starting point. And then we're copying it. I'll get into this in a minute here, but we'll be presented with 2 options. Majority of the time we want to use this copy top role, and I'll talk about why on the next slide here. Once you do have that copied role, we want to identify, again, those roles or privileges that need to be added or removed. So again, in those cases, it's, hey, these folks shouldn't have access to this transaction or this page, or maybe they need some additional access to something else. So when I figure out what those are, we can, add those in through the security console. If you're already going to do a lot of changes, definitely recommend to start with smaller incremental changes and then sort of unit test along the way. And, from my perspective, the reason for that is, if you end up pulling back or removing too much, other things in the role may start breaking. And then you have to go back and try to figure out, okay, what did I remove that may have impacted something else, especially if you're not familiar with all of the roles or privileges. So I would definitely start small and kind of work your way up, especially if it's a lot of modifications are needed. And then on that point, documentation is, I think, very important here, just so have some history on what exactly is being done there. And then I'm trying to move through the rest of this a little bit quickly here. I know we're running out low on time. So once you make the changes, there are some processes here that you do need to run. And then obviously we want to test here. A couple steps here on, how do we test? You want to log out, log in, clear browser cache as needed there. When it comes to this role copy piece, I'm not going to go through this entire one line by line here, but the main takeaway is if if we do this, deep copy, as it's called, and where we copy the inherited roles, it's going to create, a bunch of smaller copies of these roles that are, within your predefined role, which again, this becomes a maintenance nightmare kind of going forward. So unless you're, my recommendation for clients is unless you're 100% sure that you need this deep copy, just always start and do the top copy. It'll make your lives much easier down the road there. All right, and then last section we have is just some information here on security audit and auditing and reporting. So Oracle does have delivered audit policies, even for security. So it's actually the same audit policies you would configure for the functional modules. So step one, we just have to enable that first. So if you go to that manage audit policies page, there's a security option here that you can enable. And then once you have it enabled, there's another section here where you can go to these audit reports. A couple of parameters you would have to enter in, your date, select the security product here. And then the event, there's actually, dozens of different events here, but things you may want to, take a look at are, who's creating roles or who may be deleting roles, who's adding roles to other users, password resets, things like that, or folks are modifying roles, right? So those things aren't inherently clear in the security console when you're looking at it, like if someone has changed it. But if you did want to, maybe you did find an issue or something like that, we can run this report and you'd be able to see like what's been done to a role or to a user and who's done it and when. And then lastly, for reporting, get this question quite often. There are a number of different mechanisms for security reporting. So there actually is very good documentation from Oracle on some of the delivered reports here. This user and role access audit report's a very detailed one, basically for trying to see, hey, what are all the users and what, roles do they have? And even what privileges would they have as well? You're able to see that there. There's if you're using local passwords here, you're able to audit that. So a lot of good stuff in here. I provided the link if folks want to read up on that. But again, I think the documentation is very good there. And then on the other side here, if you're looking for some other ad hoc or custom reporting, there actually is OTBI subject areas here. So if you're familiar with OTBI, it's the drag and drop reporting. Same thing here for security with from the roles and role hierarchy and even down to the user level. So these are very easy, use these quite often. There's even Oracle delivers some security dashboards here that, again, kind of leverage these different subject areas. So some good information here as well that, again, should be already available in your environment. So, all right. So I know we're coming up on time. That was actually the last slide I wanted to cover. So I think we can probably turn it over to the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. We did have a few questions, and I don't think we're going to get to any additional ones. So I am bringing up our contact information. Please reach out to us if you have any additional questions or if you have any ideas. But let me get to a few of these here, Aaron. One is about the subscription impact. So if Oracle hasn't reached out yet to a user, they're asking, how will they know if their license is if their roles are causing a license impact? Should they just assume they're okay, or is there anything they can proactively do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there actually is some documentation from Oracle that we can provide that basically for every role, it sort of outlines, for example, for the employee role, here's the, 5 or 6 different licenses it actually touches and impacts. So it could be, HCM, finance, procurement, et cetera. And it actually will tell you which privileges is tied to that subscription impact as well. So if you're using the seeded roles, that's a very good resource. Even if you have other custom roles now, they're actually internally at Peloton, we do have some reports that we can run as well. So if you're interested, again, you can reach out to us. We can help you get some of those reports set up where, again, we're able to run a report against the roles and it'll show similar information, right? So here's a role, here's the license impacts, and then you can kind of take action from there.
Okay, great. Another question, if I set up my custom roles in a test environment, am I able to migrate those to production or to another testing environment?
Yes, so there is a capability within Oracle and actually leverages the functional setup manager, the FSM tool. We're able to actually create this configuration package. Again, Oracle has good documentation on it. We can help provide guidance on it as well. Basically within that tool, you can select one or as many roles as you want that you want it to migrate. And then you can export it from one environment and then import it into your other environment very seamlessly. So we use it all the time on our implementation projects. Works very well. So long story short, yes, there is a way to migrate. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then one last question here from someone. So, I've been using the delivered roles, thinking about custom roles now, but I see sometimes in quarterly updates, there's some mentions about if I'm using custom roles, do this. I mean, what will I need to think about for quarterly updates? What are the security considerations if I change my approach?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So, one of the, I would say, downsides, if you will, for the custom roles is, during quarterly updates, Oracle obviously releases new features and functionality, and a lot of times those are tied to new privileges or even potentially new roles. So if you are using custom roles, you won't actually get those updates, automatically added into your custom roles. So, typically what we'd recommend as sort of part of your quarterly update preparation, hopefully you're going through reading your release notes. If you do see a feature in there that you're interested in or would like to use, Oracle should tell you exactly what role or privilege that's tied to. And then probably in your test environment, you go through, add that to your custom role. And then if it does, works as intended, you can eventually promote that into production. So I think from an approach perspective, if you're, using seeded roles now, you probably get those updates automatically into your seeded roles. If you're using custom roles, that's going to be something that you'll have to take care of during quarterly updates, if obviously you want that functionality.
Okay, great. Great, thanks, Aaron. Well, you obviously have a wealth of knowledge and expertise on security. I'm lucky to have you as part of our Peloton HCM team. So that was wonderful. Appreciate your time today. And everyone, that's the end of our time together. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for making time with us here today. We hope it was a valuable training and you're able to take some of these good learnings back to your work and back to your teams. Again, reach out if needed. This series is for you, so please don't feel shy to reach out and let us know what you might need. And keep an eye on your inbox for next month's training. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.